Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here today, and thank you to the South Church Folk Band for kicking us off in what I believe is going to be really informative, engaging afternoon. So thank you for being here. I'm Mark Eves, Chair of the South Church Board of Trustees, and it's my honor to welcome you today to celebrate 200 years of this South Church building. Pretty remarkable. Yep, we got a shout out for Kathy over there. Before we get going, just a few logistics. If you're not familiar with the building, the restrooms are located downstairs. If you need assistance, one of our volunteers staff can help you do that. If you need an assisted listening device as well, they are located in the back, if that is helpful. Following the program, we thought we were going to be out on the portico, but it was pretty darn windy setting up the table, so we're actually going to be down in the fellowship hall. Join us there to continue the conversation. There'll be cookies and drinks, and we'd love to share that moment with you as well. Before we begin on this day when we are reflecting on the history of our shared community, it feels really important to acknowledge that for thousands of years before the arrival of European colonizers, this land we all call home was known as Deaglan and was carefully stewarded by indigenous people, including the Abenaki, Pimlico, and Wabanaki peoples, past and present, for whom justice and self-determination has long been withheld. May this acknowledgement compel each of us to take action toward repairing harms and damaged relationships with indigenous people here in New England and across the globe, as well with the land herself. So our theme today is building community, and that idea reaches far beyond these walls. It speaks to the connections that bind us together across generations, experiences, and backgrounds. Whether you come from a faith tradition, a secular perspective, or simply just curious, you belong here today. For me, South Church is deeply personal. My wife, Laura, and I have been part of this community for 15 years. We raised our 3 children here, and what we found was more than a church or just a church building. It was a place of belonging, a place that grounded us and connected us and became part of the story of our family. And this building holds thousands of stories like ours, some similar and some very different. Within these walls, couples have stood before families and friends to begin their marriages. Families have gathered to grieve and remember loved ones at funerals and memorial services. Community groups have met here to organize, advocate, and support one another. Political campaigns have launched conversations that have shaped civic life. Small affinity groups have gathered in quiet rooms seeking connection and understanding. This building is more than a historic architecture. It is a living witness to the life of our community. As we celebrate these 200 years, we're also thinking about the generations that follow us. Through the Building Preservation Fund that was recently established, we are working to ensure that this space continues to serve as a home for community, reflection, celebration, and service for the next 200 years. So today, if you feel inspired by what this place has meant in your life, or what it may yet mean in the lives of others, I invite you to support that effort. Every contribution, large and small, helps preserve not just a building, but experiences, memories, and connections that happen within it. You can find a QR code on the back of the program to participate. Today's program is an invitation to reflect on community connections and see both familiar stories and new perspectives with fresh eyes, and perhaps to gain a better and broader understanding of what 292 State Street means to the wider Seacoast community. Peter Michaud, Eric Lipsitt will guide us through the evolution of this remarkable building. Angela Matthews and Janet Polasky will connect us to the history that shaped this congregation and the broader community. And Reverend Ellen Quaadgras and Kirsten will share how that legacy continues through the work and service of South Church today. I would like to extend my sincere thanks and appreciation to the 200th Building Anniversary Committee. Their dedication and vision have made this celebration possible, and this event is only one of many events that are going to happen throughout the year to mark this important milestone. You can find more information on the South Church website about all the events. My hope for this afternoon is simple, that this hour reminds us all of the power of community and our responsibility to sustain it. After the program, I invite you again downstairs in the fellowship hall to continue the conversation. And now, we are fortunate to be joined by leaders who share a commitment to building strong and connected communities. To represent that spirit here in Portsmouth, it is my honor to introduce Mayor McEachern. Mayor McEachern was elected mayor of Portsmouth in November 2021. Raised in Portsmouth, he and his wife and 2 daughters live in the Islington Creek neighborhood, across the street from the house his grandfather built in 1940. Please help me welcome a civic leader that understands the importance and power of community. Mayor McEachern.
Another round of applause for Mark. Thank you, Mark. The only thing I have to correct on that bio, and it's my fault, but it's the Crick. It's not the Islington Creek. I just have ancestors that I am beholden to for that. Good afternoon. Thank you, Reverend Quaadgras, Mark Eves, and the board, the building committee, the congregation, for the honor of being here with you this afternoon. 200 years. It's hard to hold that number in your hand. This building is beautiful. We all know it. The granite, the columns, the corner of State Street that wouldn't be Portsmouth without it. But I am not here to celebrate granite alone. A building is made of granite. A community is made by work, and that work is harder. The man who oversaw the raising of this building understood that. His name was Nathan Parker. He was the minister of the South Parish when the granite went up in 1826. And he had a word for what he thought a religious life required. He called it being useful. Parker thought a Christian's job, and I would say a citizen's job, was not to feel the right things or say the right things, but to do the useful thing. He used to say you could not learn to lay a stone wall by piling up feathers. Sentiment was feathers. The wall was built of work. I think a lot about that in my job. It's one thing to make people feel better. It is another thing entirely to make their lives better. And the second one is the only reliable way to do the first. A neighbor's roof is fixed feels different about her town than the one whose roof is leaking. A child who has a place to go after school feels different about his future than the one who does not. Feelings follow circumstance more than circumstances follow feelings. If we want a kinder country, a more hopeful country, a less exhausted country, the way to get there is not to argue people into it, it is to be useful. That is what this congregation has done for 200 years. The Sunday school, the food pantry, the visit to the sick neighbor, the room held for the family who needed it. None of it grand, all of it work. So today, when we celebrate 200 years of the South Church, we are also recommitting to the work, to Parker's work, to the work of being useful. Because there is a real divide in this country right now, and it's not the one we usually talk about. It is not left and right. It is not red and blue. It is between the people who are doing something and the people who have decided that nothing can be done. Social feeds are engineered to produce them. Every notification, every cycle, every algorithm is calibrated to make a thoughtful person feel that the situation is hopeless and their small efforts are pointless. This is not an accident. Doom is a product. It is manufactured. It is sold to us all day. And I will tell you what I've learned in my job, watching people up close. Doom is also a choice. It feels like clarity. It feels like maturity. It feels like paying attention. It is none of those things. It is the most comfortable position a citizen can take because it asks nothing of you. If nothing can be done, you do not have to do anything. The fatalist and the cynic end up in the same place as the selfish, disengaged. And they will all arrive there convinced that they are realists. Realism means looking at the world not without hope, but inspired by what we have already accomplished. Look at where we are sitting. The building was not built by people who decided nothing could be done. It was built brick by brick, quarried, hauled here on ox-drawn sled, and raised one stone at a time. The streets outside did not pave themselves. The neighbors, we were raised by someone. Nothing around us, nothing got here by accident. It got here by work. That is the secret hiding in plain sight. The world we live in was made, and the world we live behind will be made too. The only question is by whom and whether they are paying attention. Many of you have asked me on one occasion or another why I am a happy person. Doing this job seems like a crazy thing, but the work is the answer. The way to feel better is to do that work, not to read about the work, not to argue about the work, not to share the right post about the work, to do it, to fix the things in front of you, to show up for that neighbor in front of you. I have never met a person doing useful work who was also in despair. I have met plenty of people who are despairing, who are not doing any of the work. The correlation is almost perfect, and I don't think it's a coincidence. It's funny, really. We already know this. Candy feels good in the moment. Running makes you feel better. We have known the difference since we were young. We just forgot to apply it to the rest of our lives. Social media is candy. The argument is candy. The doom is candy. None of it builds anything. None of it leaves you any better than it found you. The work is the run. So if you are tired right now, I understand, but I will not tell you to rest. I will tell you what this congregation has been telling Portsmouth for 200 years. Get up, find the useful thing, do it. The feeling you are looking for is on the other side of the work, and it cannot be reached any other way. So as mayor, on behalf of a city that owes this congregation more than it can ever repay, let me say it plainly. Thank you. Thank you for the music in the morning, and the meals, and the meetings. Thank you for the work no plaque will ever record. Thank you for being, for 2 centuries, a place in Portsmouth where the door stayed open and the work got done. And to the people who will stand in this room 200 years from now, on whatever anniversary they are marking, I hope they will not remember our arguments. I hope also they won't remember our budgets, God willing. But I hope they will be able to say one thing, and only one thing about us, that when it was our turn, we were useful. Brick by brick, useful act by useful act, we left them a place worth standing in, the way the people who built the church left it for us. We did not lay this granite. We did not found this congregation. We did not build the streets that brought us here today. We are inheritors of useful work, and the only thing we owe the people who come after us is more of the same. Congratulations, South Church. 200 years. May the next 200 be worthy of the first. Well, the granite wasn't the only useful thing this congregation has done. You've done a lot. But it gave the work a home for the next 200 years. To help us better understand the history and the architecture that makes this building so significant, I'm pleased to introduce Peter Michaud and Eric Lipsitt. They will guide us to the story of the Granite Church and its enduring place in this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. If you ever want to see what the definition of a hard act to follow is, that would be what we just experienced now. And I promise, I'm not playing on my phone. I actually have my notes on my phone in a way to try to reduce paper. So I want to just talk a little bit about sort of the architecture and how this fits in both nationally but also locally and also sort of on a state context as well. And, to begin, I want to begin with, in part in the Golden Girls reference, but, picture it, the United States, 1826. 1825, the year before this church, opened to the public, the year before we had our first election where a president was elected who was not a founding father. Anyone remember who that was? John Quincy Adams. So we literally were handing over, the control of the country is literally being handed over to the next generation. Also a very contentious election that some people said was stolen. We survived that, thankfully. It's also, we're at the cusp of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution begins in the late 18th, early 19th century. By this time, we have mills along the northern edge of the Piscataqua region that are producing textiles. Wool, they're producing wallpaper as well, they're producing cotton textiles. The area is starting to change immensely, and it's not just happening here, it's happening across the country. And the country itself is changing in size. We are growing. This is the beginning of that sort of expansion to the west. And so we are this amazing, brand new country. We are finally coming into our own. We won the War of 1812. We are now the second generation, and we're ready to sort of celebrate that. And we start celebrating that with the buildings that we design and construct in our communities. Now, in Portsmouth, I want to also address, if you ever go to a historic house museum in Portsmouth and they talk about the early 19th century, it's this very sort of soundbite, well, there was the Jefferson Embargo of 1807, which cut off all trade, the War of 1812, and then shipping stopped, and Portsmouth died until the 20th century. And it's not exactly true. It's a more nuanced conversation. When this church was built, Portsmouth was still going strong. And we suffered fires, we were having economic difficulties, but there was still this economic flow because all those industrial cities that were being developed in Dover and Newmarket and Rollinsford and Exeter were all shipping their product through Portsmouth because no railroads existed. So what really finally sort of causes the downfall of Portsmouth is the arrival of the railroads in the 1830s and 1840s. But up until that time, Portsmouth is economically viable because Portsmouth is reliant, as it was throughout the 18th century, on its neighbors to the north and upriver. Now, in this time period, we have what we call Greek Revival architecture. And a lot of people say it's a truly American style of architecture. It's the architecture style that was developed in America, which is a little not true. It's a lot not true. It has its origins out in Europe. And so if you think about architecture in the 18th century, we have Georgian architecture, which is looking at the works of Palladio, and then which was an Italian architect. So we're looking at Roman classicism and the development of those big manor houses that you see in England, but also in the design of places like the Warner House or the Langdon House or the Moffat Ladd House. I don't want to leave out any houses because I might offend somebody, but we'll have to. So you have those are based off of Roman classicism, and then it gets refined again with the Adams-esque style, what we call the Federal style here. So if you think of the Moffat Ladd House, that's an extension of that same Roman classicism. But in the 18th century in Europe, in Western Europe, people started to turn towards Greece, which was, of course, the source of classicism. And that's when they started to go and look at what Greece was doing, ancient Greece, and looking at places like the Parthenon, and then trying to emulate that architecture, going right to the source. And that starts to happen here. And it really, we have some early examples in the USA, and this is where I'm going to have to admit I need bifocals, but I don't have them. And we grasp onto this sort of Greek style for a couple reasons here in the country. One of them is, we're celebrating ourselves. We were a democratic nation. It was the Great Experiment, and the Great Experiment was a success. And what's the birthplace of democracy? Greece. So our architecture should be reflective of Greece. We're connecting ourselves to the birthplace of the democracy that we hold dear. We also are looking at, this idea of what is a stately building, and the Parthenon. When you look at the Parthenon, when you look at this building, it's an impressive building. It makes a statement. It's very formal, but also very accessible. And Greek Revival architecture, I should really briefly state, it comes in a variety of different forms, but it's looking at basically that Greek style. So when you look at this, at the front of this building, it sort of kind of looks like a Greek temple, a modern modern if you're in the 1820s version of a Greek temple, but nonetheless, for the 1820s, a modern version of a Greek temple. And you see this in impressive ways like the South Church here, but you can also see it in very vernacular, more simple ways. And if you ever see a little house where the little gable points to the front and you have these little pilasters on the sides that look like columns, that's Greek Revival. The style begins in Philadelphia with the construction of the Bank of Pennsylvania in 1798, and Philadelphia was like the hotbed of Greek revival. But then it quickly comes up, and by the early 19th century, it had come up to Boston with Alexander Paris, who was another architect, St. Paul's Church, which was built in 1819, still standing there today. And if you've not been there, just picture this building made out of granite, but with a lot more columns on the front. And you begin to see two proponents in New England really pushing for this style. One of them is Alexander Paris, who did a lot of work locally at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, also designed St. John's Church. The other one was Asher Benjamin, who actually was a prolific publisher of designs that were then distributed, so that he really helps promote this style in the 19th century to a variety of different communities. And a lot of buildings, when you go in these rural communities and you see sort of a high style, Greek revival style building, more than likely they were influenced by Asher Benjamin. So here in Portsmouth, the first Greek revival building is this one. It's South Church. And it was built, as you know, in 1824, 1826, which is why we're here today, 200 years later. And it was designed by a man named Jonathan Folsom, who was originally from Exeter and came to Portsmouth and was a joiner. He built buildings. And as a joiner, he also served as an architect. So this is one of his examples. Other examples of his work, and I'm kind of a Jonathan Folsom groupie because some of my favorite buildings in this area are by him. The Larkin Rice House, which is the brick federal-style house on Middle Street that was converted into condos recently, is one of his. The original Customs House, which is across from the Federal Building, that brick building, is one of his. And then not standing, but a building I wish I could have known, the Alabama Ship House, which literally was built in 1813 over the shipways at Portsmouth Naval Shipyard as they were constructing the USS Washington to protect it from the weather and from a possible British invasion. A massive timber frame building. So really some impressive pieces of work of his survive here, South Church being sort of the apex of his career with its granite walls. And if you've never been in the attic, there's this amazing timber scissor truss that holds this roof up and this ceiling up that is truly impressive and a work of art. When it was completed, this was a building of note. A regional publication, the New England Galaxy, claimed it was a model for the next church in Boston. And it inspired a number of churches, including one in Quincy, Mass, that was designed by Alexander Paris. So Alexander Paris builds one of the first Greek Revival buildings, but then is starting to emulate some of the things that Folsom did here on a church he builds after its construction. And then we take off, and it becomes the prominent style of architecture from about the 1820s until about 1860, 1870, especially in New Hampshire. It becomes the architecture of government. We use it for local schools and townhouses, what we call town halls today. So if you think of the Plain School that the Pontine Movement Theater occupies today, Greek Revival architecture. Franklin School, which is now condos, Greek Revival architecture. Out on the hinterlands of the Piscataqua, Dover, Newmarket, Somersworth, all built big Greek Revival brick townhouses in the 1830s, 1840s. Exeter built one out of wood. Unfortunately, the three brick ones all were lost to fire, but the wood one is still standing in Exeter. It becomes the predominant domestic architecture, and if you go out into the sort of West End area, you'll see a lot of Greek Revival houses out there as well, and it happens all across this region and all across this country. Even people who had homes that were built earlier start remodeling, putting in Greek Revival fireplaces, Greek Revival porticos over their door, Greek Revival gewgaws and doodads. It really was sort of the next wave, and it was incredibly popular. And you then still saw it, even after Greek Revival dies across the country and is no longer the architecture of choice. It was an affordable style, and wood especially. And so if you look through New Hampshire, you'll see throughout like the hinterlands of New Hampshire, townhouses, town halls, and schools that were built in the 1880s, 90s, early 1900s that are still Greek Revival because that was the architecture of government in people's minds. So here we are today, 200 years after this building opened. It's an architectural style that developed across the USA in the early decades of the Republic and was utilized universally from small vernacular buildings to architect design buildings to grand buildings like this one. South Church was the introduction of this style to the Piscataqua and to the state of New Hampshire. And it's a style that became predominant within government buildings. In turn, this building had a regional impact that extended well into Maine as well as Massachusetts. It's an incredible building that's been well stored, and it's wonderful that we can still be here and appreciate it today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eric Lipsitt. My wife and I first began attending South Church in 1999. At that time, our 29-year-old daughter was not quite 2, and our 25-year-old son wasn't even born yet. I have volunteered my time at South Church in many different ways. Some have been significant roles, and some have been in helping with the building renovation. So I guess I drew the short straw to do this segment. But before I go any further, one of my coolest volunteer efforts is to be a senior youth advisor, and my posse's back there in the corner. As it was just discussed, we're here today to celebrate the 200th anniversary of this amazing building. Pete just did a great job of talking about the history and the architecture of this area. I'm going to take a few minutes to talk a little bit more about the 20th century and the 21st century and some of the building improvements and highlights. First off, it wasn't until 1925 when we installed electricity into this building. It was not until 1940 when we dug out the basement that we all go to for coffee hour in this building. It was in 1953 when we installed this organ. And prior to being here, this organ was at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. In the 70s, here at church was a tough time. The attendance was down. There were other things going on at that time. Services started to be held in the basement because it was too expensive to heat upstairs here. There was a vote that took place at that time on whether to call another minister or whether to sell the building and move out of town. Thank goodness for all of us, we know which way that vote went. And in 1983, the congregation called Reverend Bob Carnan to be the next synod minister. He was here for 12 years, from 1983 to 1995. And in the 1990s, South Church was the fastest growing Unitarian Universalist church in the country. Next, what I'd really like to do is highlight some of the things that we've done just in the last decade to 12 years. Over that period of time of capital improvements, our congregation has spent more than $4 million in maintaining this building and the other one that we own. In 2015, South Church did a capital campaign in which we raised almost $2 million. The results of that capital campaign were a number of things that we did. The first one was that we installed a fire suppression system throughout this whole building. Quick go off topic and my script for just a minute. Can you see the sprinklers in the ceiling? They're the kind that pop out. So you see the caps. And as Peter just talked about a minute ago, above that ceiling there was a double threshold. That ceiling is just hanging there. And so the first thing that the contractor had to do was build a catwalk above that. And every single person who worked up there had all of their tools tied to their belt so that no one would drop them and fall through the ceiling. The next thing we did with that $2 million is we repainted this place. We also modified both of the egresses to this building. How many of you were here more than 10 years ago when we used to walk through those doors that were right there where we now have a closet? That's right. And this staircase back here was this wide. So we did a lot of work on both the back egress and also the amazing front egress that we have, which we had to blow through the rock wall to do. The other thing that we did with that capital campaign is we purchased the other building that we own that's about a block and a half down the street, which is 73 Court Street. That's where we moved all of the staff. And the goal for that actually was more in depth. It was to make sure that all of our programmable space could be right downstairs. We wanted to make sure that on a Sunday morning, we could handle all of the different programs, the religious education, the meetings, and whatever else happened on Sunday and throughout the week in that space. Another little tidbit for you, since most of you are part of this congregation, when we did that renovation of downstairs, we made sure that we added 2 showers to 2 of the bathrooms downstairs, which now qualifies our church as a Red Cross Emergency Center, and it is a place where we do offer showers once a week for those who are unhoused. In 2021, the congregation did another capital campaign. It was a much smaller capital campaign, but another capital campaign because it was time to replace the shingles on the roof that were still the originals. Overall, it was a $1 million project. The congregation pledged about half of that amount in a capital campaign. We also then qualified for an L-CHIP grant through the state of New Hampshire for $330,000, and the rest of it we took out a small loan through a bank here in downtown Portsmouth. L-CHIP stands for the New Hampshire Land and Community Heritage Investment Program. The state fund is used for historical preservation, land conservation, and community heritage. South Church is now on a 20-year preservation easement with the state. It is a binding agreement that we have to protect the historical character of this property. Beginning in 2025, we started a multi-year project to restore these windows. We've been replacing all of the sashes, removing all of the painted surfaces, removing each of the glass panes, soaking them, polishing them, refitting them, and then replacing all of the wood. It costs $60,000 to do one set of glass panes. One of these, there are 10. We've done 2 so far, and the goal of the church is to do 2 each year for the next 4 years, to commit to $120,000 for each of the next 4 years to complete that project. If I may, I'd like to just stop for just a minute and tell a quick story. I was on the board of trustees in 2022 when Reverend Ellen arrived. And one of the things that she wanted to do was kind of have a bonding experience for all of us. She suggested that on a Saturday morning, some members of the board of trustees and herself go on a historical tour. So we met at the Portsmouth Historical Society, and we had a tour guide give us a tour. The tour guide didn't know who we were. We were just a group of friends that was meeting on a Saturday morning. Tour guide started at the Historical Society, made a few other stops along the way, and then stopped right here in front of our church. And when they stopped in front of our church, the tour guide said a handful of things about this building, and then said, "This is the conscience of the seacoast." That's what the tour guide was saying on all of their tours as they were giving them. And I'm very proud of that fact. So, along with talking about where the granite came from and what this building means and all of the other things, I felt it was really powerful that, the tour guide was talking about this is the place where people come as the conscience of the seacoast. It's important to me that I listed off in my part here a lot of the significant improvements that we've done over the last 10 to 12 years. All of these improvements have been paid for by raising internally through congregation, through our own members, through capital campaigns, and through our annual budgets. With this event today and throughout the rest of the year, we're hoping to raise awareness to the broader Seacoast community as it relates to the costs associated with maintaining this historical structure. As the tour guide pointed out, the building has become so much more than just the religious home of the Unitarian Universalist congregation. It is the community space in downtown Portsmouth. Whether it's a concert upstairs or chili downstairs on New Year's Eve, whether it's the Contutti concert that was just here last night, whether it's for whatever kind of community space it is, this is the place. It is the second largest venue in all of downtown Portsmouth behind the music hall. South Church has been the rain backup location for the summer concert series at Prescott Park. It's been the longtime home for Con Tutti and Voices from the Heart. It's been the place that people gathered for a candlelight vigil after 9/11. It is the place that is the interconnected web of downtown Portsmouth. I hope in my first part of my segment, I was able to outline for you some of what the membership has done. As I said, just in the last 10 to 12 years, we've spent over $4 million in maintaining this building. I also wanted to make sure you understand that we are committed to the upkeep of this building and the historical structure that we have and how important this building is to all of us as members. And I lost my train of thought there. Anyway, with that, I will turn it over to Janet and Angela.
Thank you, Eric. Not as tall. Thank you, Eric and Peter. Angela Matthews and I will explore the origins of the South Parish in 1714 and the interconnections of the African American community with North and South Church in the 18th century Portsmouth. We will ask how our ancestors built this why our ancestors built this magnificent sanctuary, and look at how, over the last 200 years, folks at South Church have lived their minister's charge to the congregation in 1826 to, as our mayor said, go forth from these pews into the community and be useful. I'm a historian. So with your indulgence, I will begin not at the beginning, but about a century into our story. By 1707, the Portsmouth parish had outgrown its second meeting house built of logs. In 1711, in a vote of 65 to 45, the town decided to relocate the meeting house from the hill above Pickering's Mill to the northeast corner of the glebe. The glebe is the land set aside to support the minister and includes what we now recognize as the African burial ground. Now, not everyone was happy with the decision to shift north, including John Pickering, who not only owned the mill, but was Speaker of the New Hampshire General Assembly. His voice carried weight, but not enough. The minister, Nathaniel Rogers, went north with the majority to preach in the new meeting house with its handsome spire. The dissidents stayed behind in what was known as South Parish. Most South Church ministers have subsequently suggested that theological differences divided the two churches, alleging that South Church was more progressive from the beginning. Not an explanation supported by evidence. Others would have it that the wealthy elite became North Church, in possession of the church silver and tax privileges, leaving the poor artisans behind in the South Parish. However, if we take records at their word, something I tend to do as a historian, the split in 1714 reflected the geography of the early settlement of our growing seaport. South Church split because churchgoers living near the old meeting house did not want to walk so far north on Sunday. Back to the documents, we have the original Confession of Faith that was signed by the members of South Parish in 1717. It was not all that different from the call of North Church. The theology of the two Portsmouth churches diverged over the centuries as North and South churches followed ministers on very different journeys. On the pages of this first South Church record book, among the covenanting members, we find several men and women identified as, quote, Negro servants, men and women enslaved by South Church congregants. Although the first South Church minister, John Emerson, owned slaves, they apparently were not invited or did not choose to join South Church. Contradictions were rife in Portsmouth then as now. For that fascinating history, I will pass the mic to Angela Matthews, who has researched and taught us so much about the city's African American community. We did have to complicate this, but.
Try this again. How's that? Great. First, and most importantly, happy 200th anniversary, South Church. Thank you, Janet, for inviting me to tell a little of the story of the city's earliest Africans who have guided me in my Portsmouth Black History tours for almost 20 years. I apologize for having to leave right after the remarks today due to a prior commitment. Everything I know about this history is the result of over 40 years of research by long-term South Church member Valerie Cunningham, as presented in Black Portsmouth, 3 Centuries of African American Heritage, and other resources that I discovered in my own research. Without Valerie, Portsmouth and even all of New Hampshire would maintain a kind of ignorance about many of our earliest colonists. This city has witnessed many historic moments, but not the least of which was the baptism of an African family enslaved to William Cotton. Joseph and Nancy Cotton and their 2 children, Eleazar and James, were baptized into Christianity at South Parish by the Reverend John Emerson in 1717. Reverend Emerson repeats this sacrament in 1718 in his baptism of Tony and his 3 children, Caesar, James, and Samson. They were enslaved to a Colonel Hunking. It is noteworthy that Tony's wife is not mentioned. And quoting Valerie in Black Portsmouth, the record hints at one difficulty of maintaining a marriage during enslavement. His wife may have belonged to another owner, or been sold away, or had succumbed to unhealthy environment of an attic or basement living. We just don't know. But I think we can safely assume that these seeming random African baptisms were probably the tip of the pointed fur of loving acceptance that Reverend Emerson poured into his sermons and his ministry. Over 18 years of his ministry, he repeated this act of blessing many more times for both his Western European and African congregants. Perhaps it was his liberal and loving embrace of all his flock that caused his separation from Newcastle in 1712 and their church. But it was that energy and integrity on which he built his ministry at South Parish. The enslaved attended services with their enslavers. So North Parish became home to Prince and Dinah Chase Whipple and their daughter, Esther Molyneux, enslaved to General William and Catherine Moffett Whipple. The family was given their freedom some years after Prince fought alongside General Whipple in the Revolutionary War. As an aside, it was probably Prince who planted and cared for the towering chestnut tree that still stands on the east edge of the Moffett Ladd House property. Bakers and innkeepers, and formerly enslaved Pomp and Candace Wentworth Spring, also chose to attend North Parish, just steps from their home at the corners of Church and Porter Streets. There is a much longer and fascinating account of their ever too brief lives in Portsmouth, but you'll have to take a tour to learn more about them, or just walk across the street and read the commemorative marker in the small park where their home once stood. Though she chose to attend North Church, free woman and self-employed laundress Esther Whipple Molyneux purchased a sturdy home on Holmes Court in the South End that still stands. The working-class congregants of South Parish built their South End of Portsmouth alongside their enslaved and freed Africans over the course of Reverend Haven's tenure, spanning 54 years, from 1752 to 1806. Now, the most notorious New Hampshire woman of African descent of that era was Ona Judge Staines, self-emancipated from the enslavement of Martha and George Washington. Ona found refuge with Pomp and Candace Spring at their home, as I told you, across the street, in what was likely a stop on the Underground Railroad. Though there is no written record, it seems reasonable to suggest that if Ona and Jack chose Reverend Samuel Haven as their officiant, they were probably members or became members of this congregation. Reverend Haven performed Ona's marriage to Seaman Jack Staines 3 months after she arrived in Portsmouth from Philadelphia in May of 1776. She arrived aboard the Nancy, captained by South End resident John Bowles. And probably she was not his only African fugitive. Ona never disclosed his name until after he died, protecting those others to follow. Janet.
Nathan Parker, we've already heard about, followed Samuel Havens, and like his beloved predecessor, he not only served South Church for decades, he introduced changes over time. The young preacher did not intend to pull South Church into religious controversy, but he did. In 1819, Nathan Parker participated in an ordination in Baltimore alongside William Ellery Channing of Boston's Federal Street Church. Channing preached the 90-minute sermon that openly embraced Unitarianism. That did not sit well with the very orthodox minister of North Church, Israel Putnam, who denounced the neighboring Congregationalist preacher as a heretic. Putnam refused to exchange pulpits with Parker, as had been their practice. In contrast, the South Parish accepted their minister's pronouncement, quote, that there is one God and one only who is infinitely good, kind, and benevolent. A century after the division of North Church and South Church over a practical question of geography, the split between the two congregational churches had taken a theological turn. Subsequently, rather than disputing beliefs within either church, residents of Portsmouth walked to the church with a minister more in keeping with their faith. Their choices solidified the divergence. Against the backdrop of theological dissension in Portsmouth, South Parish decided to build the granite church where we're all sitting today. and Portsmouth's merchants, still prospering from the Atlantic trade, funded it. The congregation was not expanding at that time. They had no more members in 1821 than in 1790. South Church deacons lamented, quote, "With the exception of 2 remarkable years of earthquakes, it appears that the condition of the church has remained nearly the same for a century." So why build this massive granite church in 1824? Well, Congregationalists and Unitarians throughout New England were building substantial churches. Setting its democratic design in stone, Portsmouth South Church was not an outlier, as Peter has explained. And also, their old wooden meeting house in the South End was, quote, "in a state of general decay." In fact, church leaders warned the congregation that, quote, "in a strong gale, the steeple will blow over." That is a good reason for building a new church, one without a steeple. Nathan Parker praised South Church for its foresight in building the stone church. Quote, "The church is built for perpetuity," he told parishioners. "Its elements are as indestructible as the earth on which it rests." To this day, 2 centuries later, its walls have proved indestructible, if also very expensive to maintain. Also problematic, those same prosperous merchants who funded the church posed a challenge to the ministers who followed Nathan Parker. Their mercantile fortunes were tied, directly or indirectly, to markets in the South and the West Indies, thus to slavery. In the decades leading to the Civil War, it was the South Church minister who refused to exchange pulpits. This time with the Universalists, whose pulpit hosted the leading lights of the Universalist movement and whose church was the largest in 19th century Portsmouth. The issue, slavery. Abolitionists were definitely more at home among the Universalists than the Unitarians in Portsmouth as elsewhere in New England. So when the Universalist minister, A.J. Patterson, was drafted into the Union Army, the congregation not only gave him their blessing, but raised funds to support his work. In contrast, the South Church minister, James de Normandy, prayed for peace and the cessation of hostilities, a call in line with the aspiration of the mercantile families in his congregation. Long-serving ministers could not afford to rock the granite structure. Well, fortunately for our story, individual parishioners in South Church, especially the women, actively supported the Union cause. Mary A. Foster, a leader of the South Church Ladies Domestic Missionary Society, traveled to Washington to care for wounded soldiers in makeshift hospitals. Sometimes it took a near mutiny of the male nurses and other staff to convince the surgeons to let her work in their wards. Maybe her example, and that of the rest of the Ladies Domestic Mission Society, who raised funds not only for a Sabbath school in Portsmouth, but for freedmen's schools in the South, inspired those who followed them.
Two other notable moments in South Church's Black history belong to the 19th century minister, Reverend Daniel Austin, and almost 100 years later, the 20th century minister, Reverend John Papandrew. The Reverend Daniel Austin, who grew up in Portsmouth and attended Harvard Divinity School, preached at South Church but was never called to serve as its minister. Upon his death in 1881, he provided $500, $15,000 in today's dollars, for an endowment with the city of Portsmouth to permanently provide for the celebration of Juneteenth every January 1st to commemorate the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. The fund still exists and has been used by the Black Heritage Trail for Juneteenth activities, which now are held in June because emancipation did not reach the last outpost in Galveston, Texas, until June 19, 1865. About 83 years later, a contemporary example of an ever-evolving citizenry emerged during the brief tenure of Reverend John Papandrew, who served South Church from 1961 to 1964. Quoting Black Portsmouth again, "There were countless local actions that urged legislation and nudged local compliance with the law. Reverend Papandrew was active with the local NAACP, and he participated in their effort to integrate the Wentworth by the Sea dining room on the occasion of July 4th, 1964. As part of an elaborate scheme, Reverend Papandrew and his wife Betty stationed themselves in the lobby of the hotel adjacent to the dining room to witness the actions of hotel owner James Barker Smith. UNH professor Hugh Potter and his wife Jean arrived for their 7 p.m. prepaid reservation and were shown the table for 4. When a Black couple, Emerson and Jane Reed, arrived to join them, Reverend Papandrew documented the unfolding drama. By the new laws, the Reeds should have been taken immediately to the Potter table for 4. In his office, Proprietor Smith loudly argued with Reed and Potter regarding the new laws until Potter produced the receipt for his prepaid dinner as legal evidence of the denial of the Civil Rights Act. The foursome ultimately was seated at 9 p.m., a full 2 hours after their reservation, but prominently near the door and the dessert buffet, so all could see. The following week, the whole process was to be repeated, but this time, the foursome was seated without delay. Eventually, the Wentworth by the Sea even employed Black employees.
History does not move in a straight line. Just witnessed last week's Supreme Court decision gutting the Voting Rights Act. The board of South Church called John Papandrew to account for his participation in the march from Selma to Montgomery. Papandrew, rather than apologize for being arrested and serving jail time with Martin Luther King, reminded the board that the UUA constituted the largest group in the march. As he exited, he added that he hoped that at some time in their lifetime, they too could participate in such a movement. South Church has taken John Papandrew to heart.
We only need look west toward Court Place and the African burying ground beyond to witness the beauty that South Church's 21st century love wrought. More than a dozen South Church members are listed among the donors to commemorate the lives of the Africans buried not 100 yards from where we sit. On May 23, 2015, the city, and many of us here today, gathered to remember the nameless men, women, and children now resting in the peace of being recognized at last as worthy members of this community, 200 years ago to present. To quote Aboriginal Australian Alexis Wright, "The best future I can imagine for organized religion in these dangerous times is, instead of helping nostalgic people inhabit bubbles of the past, religious communities can help people go forward on this inward migration toward sovereignty of mind, where in defiance of rising level of ugliness, people cultivate beauty, seeing it, creating it, savoring it. Beauty within will lead to beauty reflected outward. Smart woman. We can inhabit a bubble of gratitude and savor the beauty of the bones that rose up in the shovel of a savvy Portsmouth DPW foreman at the east end of Chestnut Street in the spring of 2003. The foreman stopped a construction project and he listened to the bones that said, "It's time to remember us, we, the nameless Africans lying here." We are grateful for his actions that day, and we can hear those bones calling us to savor their beauty within that has led to beauty reflected outward, and that beauty is called truth.
Ministers, members, and friends of South Church, notably including Angela, have been at the groundbreaking of key institutions on the Seacoast, such as the Black Heritage Trail. They have championed movements taking on climate change, affordable housing, immigration, voting access, and so much else. From Robert Carnan on, South Church has been at the forefront of the LGBTQ+ movements, celebrating holy unions and rewriting marriage licenses for partners A and B before filing them with the city clerk of Portsmouth. But if there's one moment that captures the essence of our granite church that faces outward to Portsmouth, it might have been 9/11. That Tuesday, the annual United Way service drive began with breakfast in a Pease hangar. Our minister, Marta Flanagan, heard the news of the planes flying into the Twin Towers on her car radio, heading with other South Church volunteers from breakfast to their work site. Her husband and co-minister, Will Saunders, was already at the church. The relentless phone calls to the church convinced them to organize a gathering at South Church for the community. Brad Greeley, who had come by, as always, just where he needs to be, answered the phone while they wrote. Marta found a bed sheet and spray painted the announcement of the 7 p.m. service, hanging it on that iron fence, the same one shipped from England 200 years earlier. The church was packed that evening, as it would be 3 times more that week. When the world needs a response, South Church answers. And finally, if ever there was a moment unanticipated by Nathan Parker 200 years ago that calls for a response, that may be now. For that, I will hand the pulpit over to the 2 ministers who are most up home here. One who just returned from the West Bank, Kirsten Hunter, the Director of Lifespan Education, and the other, Reverend Ellen Quaadgras, who amidst so much else is the organizer and the force behind the Seacoast Unity Hub, which if you haven't found it yet, you should, is a collection of faith communities, nonprofits, and allies building a connected movement for justice, freedom, and mutual care. Just, I would venture, as Nathan Parker envisioned in 1826, when he sent his parishioners forth into the community to be useful from this house built for perpetuity. Thanks.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Angela, for these rich stories of this historic place. As I was reflecting on what you shared, I found myself drawn not just to what happened, but to the people inside the stories. Real people in real moments, making real choices. I think about those early baptisms that Angela spoke about, led by Reverend John Emerson, Joseph and Nancy Cotton and their children, Eleazar and James, Tony and his children, Caesar, James, and Samson. And then that small, aching, missing detail. Tony's wife is not mentioned, and we don't know why. But in that era, well before emancipation, families could be separated. No recourse, no ceremony. Children's futures were not their own. But there they all were at church, naming people, blessing people, all the people anyway, showing up, even in a world that refused to see the full humanity of these families, in an era that would never fully bless them. I wonder what that felt like for Tony, for his children, for Emerson. A human moment. And then the story keeps going, as stories always do. This congregation, like any community, has never been just one thing. It's been formed, as we heard, by geography, by economics, by theology, by courage, by fear. Sometimes by conviction, other times by convenience, sometimes by an all too human willingness to go along with the world as it is, and sometimes by courageous refusal to even think of that. There were moments when the church stayed cautious, and there were moments when people stepped forward in the name of a better world. I love the examples you shared: women raising money, Mary Foster tending to wounded soldiers during the Civil War, a minister documenting injustice in a hotel dining room, refusing to look away, a congregation slowly, imperfectly finding its way into movements for civil rights, for dignity, for inclusion, not a straight line, more like a winding path, with moments of hesitation that were not canceled out by the moments of courage, but instead, as we look back, they live together, side by side. Kirsten and I were asked to speak about where South Church is going from here. But when I think about that, I'm inclined to start not with predictions, but right here, with the history, with who we've been, at our best and at our most challenged, the human moments, where the past isn't a line-for-line blueprint for the future, but a legacy, an identity, and a practice of people who sometimes got it wrong, but who also, again and again, turned toward something larger, more just, more open. That's the inheritance we carry, turning again and again toward the light, to be useful. So now it's our turn to live that inheritance, that legacy in our time, through, for example, gatherings like the West Bank Town Hall held last week, people choosing to face difficult realities rather than turn away. I see it happening through the lives of young people growing up here, like the teenager who went on a South Church border trip to learn and found not only inspiration, but as a young adult, her vocation. Or I'm thinking of the 3 South Church youth who inspired walkouts in their high schools a few months ago. Hey, yeah, there you are, nudge each other. To protest this administration's treatment of immigrants. And we live with that inheritance through efforts like Unity Hub, helping people build connection, trust, and shared action in a difficult time. We live it through ongoing work for dignity and rights in ways both visible and behind the scenes. A little while ago, you heard South Church described as kind of a liberal social conscience of the seacoast. And while there is some truth to that, and while it is good to have an aspiration like that to live up to, that kind of conscience doesn't belong to any one congregation. It ultimately lives in a community, in people, in any moment when individuals and groups decide to care, to act, and to build something more just together. And I imagine many of you are here this afternoon because something like that matters to you too. You're interested in the history, in this building, in this place, but also, I suspect, in what can happen when people come together to create something that didn't exist before, and what becomes possible from there. So maybe the question isn't just what South Church will do next, it's what all of us together might become part of. What becomes possible when people choose again and again to live into our deepest values? And that's the question we turn to next.
What is possible when people choose again and again to live into their deepest values? Luckily, I was just repeating the question Reverend Ellen already asked. I'll say it again. What is possible when people choose again and again to live into their deepest values? We, all of us, are living in a time of tremendous change. Humankind is facing challenges in this moment that threaten our very survival as a species. The last 2 months have added a new urgency to one of those challenges, as many of us wonder, what will it take to unravel our country's economy from war profiteering? How can we become a nation who broker peace instead of weapons sales? But we're asking other profound questions also. How can we turn away from fossil fuels and extractive resource profiteering that's making our planet unlivable? How can we turn toward sustainable innovations that might eventually stabilize our climate? How do we build for a future that our children can thrive in? What solutions might address skyrocketing housing costs? Where is the path that will afford every child access to public education? How do we share the abundance we have in this small community and in our country as a whole so that every human being has the basic things that they need to survive? These are not easy questions to answer, and those are not even the only ones we're holding, because we also cannot ignore the personal things that any one of us are navigating, complexities in our individual lives, health concerns, and saving for retirement and supporting loved ones who are struggling. And doing all of that while also trying to balance work and play and seek joy in this life. How on earth can we hold all of that? The stories that we're hearing today offer the answer. The way that we hold all of that is not alone. The way that we hold all of that is in community. And this place has held this community for 2 centuries, and it's ready to do it for 200 more. Maybe even longer than that, we'll see. As we gather today to celebrate this building, but also this community, as we gather to celebrate building community, within and beyond the walls of this granite church. Let us not forget that spaces like this are exactly what we need in order to do the imagining that will bring a new future to life. People for the last 200 years have made a choice to invest in a space that does not belong to them. And the congregation that fills this church every Sunday morning now continues to make that choice, but so does the wider community. There is a reciprocity that comes with our choice to be in community with one another. And that, I think, more than anything else, is what we are celebrating today. And I love that along with recognizing all of the abundance and the joy and the brilliant innovation and pushing forward toward justness, toward rightness, is also steps backward, is also missed opportunities, is also arrogance and greed and hubris and all of the things that make us human. Author and scholar Arundhati Roy once wrote, "Another world is not only possible, she is on her way." Maybe many of us won't be here to greet her, but on a quiet day, if I listen very carefully, I can hear her breathing. When I sit in this church today, but other days, when I step into this building when it's empty, I can hear her. This is a church that is a symbol of building community. And community builders are people who hold the hardest truths of these times alongside a relentless faith that another world is possible. In moments like this, sitting in this beautiful sanctuary, this place that belongs to none of us and to all of us, we can hear her breathing. Anything is possible when we choose to come together, when we think of ourselves as weavers of a great web of interdependence which needs every one of us, and to which we each can give whatever we have to the greater good. And we've heard this today in a weaving of stories, in the very fact that history does not move in a straight line, in the telling of elaborate schemes, in the honoring of congregations who sacrifice even the heat to keep a building moving forward, in the voices of people who choose to be bold even when they know that their congregation won't support them, but also in the lessons we learn from the moments when the bold voice does not speak. All of these stories are examples of what it takes to foster community, to build for a future we do not yet know what it will look like. Anything is possible when we stay connected, when we work toward continuing to build outward, ever outward, looping more and more people into the fold, into the web. There's a poem that's written by Denise Levertov. It was written for the new year in 1981, and it is just as fitting for this new century we embark on together as a community. I have a small grain of hope, one small crystal that gleams, clear colors out of transparency. I need more. I break off a fragment to send to you. Please take this grain of hope so that mine won't shrink. Please share your fragment so that yours will grow. Only so, by division, will hope increase, like a clump of irises, which will cease to flower unless you distribute the clustered roots, unlikely source, clumsy and earth-covered, of grace. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for being a part of this community. Thank you for all of the ways that you help weave the web that will carry us forward to a future that we all maybe will get to watch start to unfold.